So, hello, thank you guys for inviting me here today. I'm super excited to talk a little bit about what Black History Month has meant to me. My experience is a little bit different, I think, than the average individual. And so I'd like to share kind of a little bit about my upbringing, who I am, and how I see kind of the continuation of this established Black History Month and what it could look like in the future. And so my name is Senait Hall. The first name is Sun, and Night is kind of the easiest way to say it. I think you all know my mother, who happens to work here. She's in the back. So I'm on my best behavior, right, because she's watching. We all know. The good news is you guys know her very well. I'm going to talk a little bit about our story, how we emigrated to the United States, and what that means for the work that I do today. So, quick little introduction. I will do just a little bit of history of Black History Month, where it was established, why it was established, and then why does the United States celebrate it. But really what I'm going to focus on is, what does Black History Month mean to me, and why is it important to me? And then why all of you should care, right? That's kind of why we're here, is to talk about how I can also inspire each of you to take on the mantle of Black History Month, what that represents, and move it forward. So I'm actually going to start off with a quote from our first Black president, President Barack Obama. He made a presidential proclamation in 2012. And in that proclamation, he spoke about the importance of Black History Month and why it was something that we should continue. So the story of African Americans is a story of resilience and perseverance. It traces a people who refused to accept circumstances under which they arrived on these shores, and it chronicles the generations who fought for an America that truly reflects the ideals enshrined in our founding documents. So a couple of interesting facts. The father of Black history is Carter Goodwin Woodson, born December 19th, 1875 in New Canton, Virginia. He was one of the first, what we would consider, African American historians. He opened the long neglected field of Black studies to scholars, and also popularized the field in schools and colleges of African Americans. He was the dean of the College of Liberal Arts and the head of the graduate faculty at Howard University, which is one of the most famous and predominant HBCUs, which is a historically Black college and university. So the origins of Black History Month. In 1915, Carter G. Woodson proposed a Negro History Week. And it was a way to honor history, right? The contributions of African Americans. 9 years later, his dream became a reality. Woodson chose the second week of February to pay tribute to the birthdays of two Americans. So February has officially become Black History Month in 1976. I also thought it was pretty amazing that it is not only celebrated within the United States, but it's become kind of internationally known. I believe Norway celebrates it, right? There's lots of other countries who have adopted this tradition. One thing that I will share is that as someone who emigrated to the United States, right, I didn't originally identify with what Black History Month meant, right? I have a very different history than what Black history was supposed to be celebrating. And so I'm going to share a little bit of my immigration story to the United States and how that has affected my relationship with kind of traditional Black or African American history. So this is a picture of my mother holding me the year we came to the United States. So it's 1981. So I was a year old when she brought me here. We had a lengthy journey to the United States with stops in Italy, which is why my mom's lasagna is kind of amazing, right? And Egypt. I had my first birthday in Egypt. I've got pictures of me in the pyramids, right? To me, this was a great trip to my mother, this was an incredible journey, right? She did this on her own, brought me to America. We landed in the United States in 1981. So to imagine this, you have a young mother, right, 28, 29 years old, and she's got a 1-year-old child. She doesn't speak the language, and she's in a foreign land. And she's decided that this is what she's going to do in order to create the best future for her child. So mom starts school in America. She decides the key to her success in this country is going to be a great education. So she starts going to school at Heritage College. I actually remember her going to Spokane Community College. We grew up on the east side of the mountains. And so I remember growing up and just my mom always being in school. That's kind of the earliest memories that I have. And there was a real commitment to education and knowing that through education, that was going to be our pathway to kind of realizing the American dream. So while she's in school, mom's working as a housekeeper. And she's working not one, but 2 jobs because she's decided that in order for me to realize this American dream, I need to be in private school. So she decides that she's going to send me to a private Catholic school in Spokane called St. Aloysius. It's associated with Gonzaga. It's literally like walking distance. And so she may not have been around a lot, right? Because she was working all of these jobs to make sure that I could go to this private school that she decided was so important to my kind of success. But she really made it a point to show up when I needed her to. So field trips, right? Things like that. They always knew who mom was. And so that was that's the foundation of how I grew up, was believing that education, education, education is what's going to make you be successful. Without a degree, without any of these things, we'll never be able to kind of achieve that American dream. So a little bit about my growing up in Spokane. For those of you who don't know, Spokane is well, in 1981-82, it was a very non-diverse community, right? We were one of a few African families who had emigrated there, and it was because we were sponsored by a church family. And so we grew up kind of in Deer Park, Washington, little community right outside of Spokane. And so I didn't see people who looked like me. I didn't grow up with people who could have the same cultural background. And so for me, it was about assimilating. It was about becoming as American as I could be. And since I was the only black kid in most of my classes, I like to tell people really interesting stories about who I was related to, right? Because they didn't know. So I was related to Michael Jackson for a little while. I feel like that was 3rd grade. 3rd grade, I think Michael Jackson was like my cousin. So I'm clear, right, these were large stretches of the imagination, but it was my way of, right, trying to fit into this community where I definitely felt like an outsider, right? I didn't look like everyone else. I didn't speak like everyone else. And I sometimes didn't smell like everyone else because at home, my mom cooked our cultural food, and there's very strong spices. I don't know if you guys have tried it before. I know mom brings it in sometimes. But it was something that was really hard for me to kind of experience. So I grew up with very little understanding of my cultural background. To me, I was working hard to be an American, and mom fought that really hard. Like, she worked really hard to make sure that I understood who I was, where we come from, our history, all of those things. But I fought that. Because for me, it was, I wanted to be like everyone else. I didn't want to be different. So in like mid-'80s, late 80s, we started coming to Seattle more often. Mom had family here, and so we would come here. And when I came to Seattle, that's when I got to see more of our culture. So our family is from Eritrea, which is a little tiny country right above Ethiopia, right along the Red Sea. And so when I came to Seattle, we got to visit with other Eritreans. I got to see, you know, my cousins. I got to experience the culture and the language and the church and all of those things that I didn't have in Spokane. And so in 1990, we moved to Seattle, right, the big city. And so, again, Mom put me in a private school. I went to Holy Family, West Seattle. And this one was a little bit more diverse. There were a lot of families of Filipino descent. There were a lot of families from Cambodia. It was a very mixed community. But again, very few people who looked like me. So once again, that goal becomes, how do I act like everyone else? So I didn't intentionally do it, but I think I turned my back on understanding Black history, what it means to be Black. All of those things just weren't important to me. It was more important to be an American, right? It was more important to be like everyone else. I went to high school at Holy Names Academy, and it was the very first time that I ever went to school with a group of other African Americans. And so I immediately found kind of that space, that community, those people who looked like me, who I felt like had a cultural identity that matched me. And so for me, that was a real big turning point in kind of who I eventually became. There was a big push and pull in my high school years between the African American community that I really wanted to be a part of and the Eritrean American community that my mom really wanted me to be a part of. And so she took me to the community center every Saturday and Sunday. I learned our language. I was involved with all of the things that they had available for us, but my heart wasn't in it. It wasn't the place that I wanted to be, right? Because it was cooler to me to be American, to be like the other kids at school, right? And even at my school at Holy Names, which is an all-girls private school, there was one other kid from Africa, and she happened to be from Ethiopia. And so for anyone who knows, Ethiopia and Eritrea are not friends, right? Not communities, especially back then. I graduated from Holy Names in 1999. And so it was a really challenging time, right? I'm still trying to figure out who I am, what I want to do with myself. Mom is really pushing me to get into the community, to understand our culture and our background. And so there was a big push-pull there. So when I went to college, I went to the University of Washington. And so I started at the University of Washington in the fall of 1999. And this was really the beginning of my personal cultural awakening. I started to see other kids who looked like me at an educational institution doing the things that I wanted to do, right? There were several students that were in the National Society of Black Engineers. So I joined that group, but I wasn't an engineer. I just wanted to hang out with them, right? There were all of these kind of groups available, and so I worked really hard to kind of figure out where I fit in. So my second year, I kind of developed a little bit more identity, and I realized I wanted to kind of really connect the African American community with the African community there. And so we decided to create the African Student Association. And it was myself, so an Eritrean American, and then one of my really good friends, his name is Jonas Seifu, who was an Ethiopian American. So the two of us decide that we're going to join power and we're going to create the African Student Association. And so we led an Afro-Caribbean night, we led fundraisers, we partnered with WSU, we partnered with Western, and we really created a space where African students could really find kind of relationships, partnerships, cultural identity, kind of all of those things. And then what else happened for me that really changed my kind of understanding of who I was I decided to go back home in 2001. And that was the very first time that I had been back home since we emigrated to the United States. And so in 2001, I bought my own airplane ticket, right? I had gotten my very first credit card. Discover messed up and gave me a credit card. So I bought an airplane ticket and I went to Eritrea. And I went without my mom. She was here, my dad had just emigrated here, and it was one of those times, so I went with a cousin of mine, and I explored the country. and I fell in love with our country, right? I had never been there before. I had never had a connection. I'd never had a relationship. I didn't understand it. And so that trip really did change, I think, the rest of my life, right? When I came back to Seattle, I was originally a pre-pharmacy major at the University of Washington. And then I decided that I would like to change my major to American Ethnic Studies. And so I changed my major to American Ethnic Studies, much to the chagrin of my mother. I think she had counted on that pharmacy, you know, she was gonna have a doctor in the house of some sort. And so I decided that I was gonna study African American studies kind of under the frame of American Ethnic Studies. And so what I learned in American Ethnic Studies is it is about it's about the history of migrant groups within the United States. So there's 3 different offshoots within American Ethnic Studies. There's African American Studies, there's Chicano Studies, and then there was Asian American Studies. And so I went the African American the African American Studies route, and I got a lot of flack for it from within the Black community who wanted to, or actually, sorry, within the African community who wanted to know why I wanted to study African American history. They were like, it's not our history, go learn our history. And I was like, nope, it's all a part of our history, right? Because here in the United States, when people see me, they don't see an Eritrean American, right? They see an African American. And so for me to really understand what that meant, I felt I had to understand the history of the people I was representing. And so that's part of why I changed my major. I did 4 years within the African American Studies department. I learned so much. To this date, well, actually, I am using my degree now, but if you ask Mom, I did not use my degree for 15 years. I worked at Verizon Wireless as a consultant. It had nothing to do with this world, and I didn't find it fulfilling. Right? I was working at a job where people were willing to threaten to blow us up over a $200 cell phone bill. And I realized that it didn't make me happy, right? There were things about going to work every day, like I loved helping people, I loved solving their problems, but I wanted it to be meaningful. So, life's twists and turns will always lead you right where you're supposed to be, right? It's kind of the way it works. So finished school in 2006, met my husband, got married in 2012, had a son in 2014. So life kind of took me in a different route. And about 4 years ago, I went back home again to Eritrea. My mom and dad decided that it was a good time for me to take a trip. They gave me a free ticket out as a birthday present. And so I went back home and I spent 5 weeks in Eritrea. And I did a lot of soul searching. I did a cleanse there. The thing that is the same about my life when I returned to the United States as it was before I left. And that was a conscious choice, right? I said, I'm gonna live in my truth. I'm gonna do things that are meaningful. I'm gonna do things that help my community, and I'm gonna do things that I'm passionate about. So I happened to meet an amazing lady at an event, and she goes, I have the perfect job for you. It was a hiring event for other jobs, and she was like, so these people are hiring today, and I can't offer you that. I can't even guarantee you that you'll get this position. She goes, I have 90 other people who have applied for this job. Technically, it closed already, but I will call my director right now, and I will have her open the position if you agree to getting your resume to me before Monday. And so she prints out the job posting, and she shows it to me. And what it is a job at Seattle Children's in the Workforce Diversity and Inclusion Department. And the focus of the job is to really increase the number of people of color who work in healthcare. And I was like, ding, 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 this is great, right? This is in line with my educational background. This is in line with my commitment and the things that I find to be important to me. So I started with Seattle Children's in May of 2019, and I started as a program coordinator. And pretty quickly, I identified that this was the right place for me. And so within 8 months, I was promoted to a program manager. And so a couple of the programs that I have managed while I've been there for the last almost 4 years. The first one is the Elizabeth Thomas Legacy Scholarship. And what this scholarship is that we offer a $5,000 scholarship to 5 to 7 students every single year. The requirements are actually very, very easy. So if you know anyone who is in nursing school or interested in going to nursing school, this is actually an active scholarship right now that we host at Seattle Children's. And so since I have been managing this program, we've awarded 43 students with $5,000 scholarships. And this year, we have really fought hard. We will now award 20 scholarships a year. And from its inception, right, we started at about, I think, 5 scholarships a year, and every year we've increased the budget. And every year we found a reason why it's really important that we give this money to the students who need it. And the letters that we get back afterwards are tear-jerking, right? These are students, when we get to call, I like to make personal phone calls when we're awarding them. And I've had people tell me, you know, this is the difference between me being able to finish my degree this year and having to take a year off. This is the difference between my husband having to get a second job so that I can finish my degree and him being able to stay home and kind of help with the family and allow me to go to school. So part of my commitment in my work has been, how do I find ways to make sure that people who want to be successful in this country have the ability to do so, right? We talk a lot about diversity and inclusion and equity and equality, right? All of these things. And I think at the bottom line, what it is that folks want to have a chance at having the life that they've dreamed of. And so if there are things that I can do to help kind of achieve that goal, that's what my degree means to me, right? That's what my educational background means to me, and that's what the work that I do means to me. The second program that we've launched is a CNA program. And so what this does is that we have students who will apply to us. We will pay for their CNA schooling. They do their clinical at Seattle Children's. And then at the end of that 1 year, the hope is that they will apply and stay with us at Seattle Children's as a CNA. This year, we just had our first graduating class of 8 students, and all 8 have asked to stay at Seattle Children's. So it's super exciting for us. These are students who wouldn't have been able to pay for school, you know, any other way. The prerequisites for all of these programs is that you have to come from an underrepresented community. And then the last program that I'm currently managing is a program partnership with Seattle Public Schools. And what we do there is this is for students with disabilities. And so it is in their last year of high school. So they finish 12th grade. They're generally transitioning. And it is a school to work program. So they go to school with us here at Seattle Children's. They also go to an internship 5 days a week. And so my job is to go out into the hospital and mine for those internships. So we meet with the students over the summer. We talk to them a little bit about what they want to do. And then I go to the different departments and I say, what kind of work do you have available? Would you like to host an intern? I do a site analysis, I do a job analysis, and then we bring our interns in. And so since I've been managing the program, we've had 16 students graduate, and we have 9 that have full-time paid employment. So the difference for these students is life-changing. They're able to become independent. We have 16 supported employees who work at the hospital currently. And what I mean by a supported employee is someone who has identified that they have a disability, that they come from an underrepresented group. And so what that means for them is they have the ability to be independent. For a lot of these folks, that wasn't a possibility without this program. A lot of times, they're kind of dismissed, right? Much like a lot of underprivileged or underrepresented groups, they're not always given an equitable chance at being successful. And so the biggest part of my job is making sure that folks have an equitable chance at success. And it doesn't necessarily mean giving everybody the same thing, right? It's about tailoring the needs to each individual student. And so that's probably been my greatest learning. This year we had a student named Destiny who at the beginning of the year told me, I love to clean. It's what I love to do. I'm really good at it. So we were like, great. We go and we contact our environmental health services team and we get her an internship there. And after a week she comes back and she goes, nope, I hate it. I don't like it. It's not what I want to do. And we're like, okay, no problem. So for her next internship, we got her a job in the Family Resource Center. So that's a place in the hospital where families can come pick up toiletries, right? Items that maybe they forgot at home. A lot of times it's an emergency. You end up at the hospital. Maybe you need a computer. Maybe you need to print out something. So she loves being in that space. So on Wednesday, I happened to go see Destiny and I did a quick check-in. And I was like, how are things going? And she's like, I love it. This is the best. This is where I'm supposed to be. So those are the success stories that really remind me the work I'm doing is meaningful, I'm passionate about it, and that it's making a difference. The other place where I have kind of found my passion has been working in the Eritrean community in Seattle here. My mom is a very, very active member, and I have been a not so active member. And probably in 2020, I don't know how many of you remember, but there was an escalation of the conflict between Ethiopia and Eritrea. And there were a lot of news reports about atrocities that were being attributed to Eritrea. And so I went to my mother and I said, what are we doing? Like, why is this what we're doing right now? They're saying that we're doing these things. And mom goes, go do your own research. Don't ask me, right? Because again, this is the lady that says education is the key to success. So she's like, go read about it yourself. Learn about it, educate yourself, and then come back and talk to me. So I go out and I read and I find out that this is a huge misinformation campaign being put on by the Ethiopians in order to wage war against Eritrea. There's a small ethnic group within Ethiopia called the Tigray people, and they essentially wanted to secede from Ethiopia. They wanted to be their own country. They feel that, right, their independence is a story much like, you know, other countries that we've heard of, much like Ukraine, things like that. And so they had a massive campaign online, social media, Instagram, Twitter, right? All of these things that I'll be very honest, I am not savvy with, right? As I'm an 80s baby, so social media is not something that I've kind of latched onto, right? So I had to really quickly figure out Twitter and Instagram and all of these other things. And what I found was a massive misinformation campaign aimed at Eritrea. This country that I'm so passionate about, this country that has taught me self-reliance, resiliency, all of those things. And so I decided with a group of other people that I would join the public diplomacy team. And so the work of this team was to get in front of elected officials and help them see the truth of the conflict. Because even the information that they were receiving from the State Department in a roundabout way was being filtered to them through social media. And we had an entire funnel. We could educate all of those things. So we met with Congressman Adam Smith. I presented to U.S. Representative Marilyn Strickland, as well as Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal. And what we did is there was a House resolution that was presented, and they were going to essentially condemn Eritrea. And that was a big deal, right? As a country who has been through sanctions, we understand the impact of that. And so we wanted to get in front of these elected officials and give them the information so that they could understand the reality of the conflict. Because again, when you are an underrepresented group in the United States, your voice doesn't get heard. And Eritreans, there's only about 3 million of us or so, and there's about 60 million Ethiopians. So that voice definitely gets dimmed. And so a lot of our work was getting in front of elected officials. We partnered with the Ethiopian community, which was unheard of at that time. We met with the Ethiopian Council of Seattle. We went, when the ambassador from Ethiopia came, we went and represented. And so what this for me was a reminder of the values that my mom has kind of always instilled in me, right? Self-reliance, education, making sure that your voice is heard in a storm of other voices. So all of this to say that Black History Month has really been established as a remembrance of the past, right? We've all kind of heard the stories. We've talked about Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks and Jesse Williams, right? Those are kind of the standard names that you hear. And the work that I'm doing right now is to really push us into a new direction. And this new direction is called Black Futures Month. And it's the reimagining of Black History Month. So we're going to change the emphasis of the history of our people to thinking about what could the future be for African Americans and our society as a whole. So Black Futures Month is important in conjunction with Black History Month, right? So it's not replacing Black History Month at all. But instead of us just kind of reflecting on the contributions that African Americans have made to the United States, it's really about reimagining a future where all of us have equitable access to success. It's also considered Afrofuturistic because it encourages to think about, to honor, to reflect, and to use our past, good or bad, to inform our present. And so there's a term for this, and it's called Sankofa. And Sankofa is the practice of going back to our roots in order to move us forward. So for me, this story comes full circle, right? Because my kind of awakening to my own cultural identity and the work that I have to do in America really started by going back home, by understanding where I come from in order to know where I want to go. So Black Futures Month offers us hope through imagination. And it's a really creative take on the reimagining of Black History Month. So at the hospital right now, we have a display case right in front of the Family Resource Center, and it's labeled Black Futures Month. And what we've done is we've asked different members of the workforce at Seattle Children's to kind of tell us what their dream is, right? What do they imagine for the future? And so for me, I think about my son. Oh, I should have shared with you guys some of these pictures. So this picture, 1981, when Mom brought me to the United States. I don't know if you can tell or not, but that is a casino background. We landed in Las Vegas, and Mom took me to the casino. She was also kicked out of the casino for taking a baby into the casino. And then this is a picture from before we emigrated. It's the last and only picture that I have with my grandmother. So that's my mom's mother on the left-hand side, and then my mom in the middle, holding me, and then my mom's younger brother on the right-hand side. And then that cutie pie is my 8-year-old son. And so he's really the reason I do all of this work, right? Is the same way that my mother came to America and emigrated and really instilled a commitment to education in me. It's the same reason I'm doing the work that I'm doing today, is I envision a future where my son has the same access to success as everyone else. And then before I leave you, I did let, so I'm going to have this available and they're going to send it out to you all. These are all links. If there are ways that you want to know, how can I celebrate Black History Month? What are ways that I can educate myself? What are ways I can share in the community? These are all links so that you can discover some African American artists. Maybe there's artwork out there that you haven't been exposed to, although I will say University House does a great job of bringing in diverse artwork here. Upstairs, kind of around, there's actually one of my cousins has artwork here. And so I know that you guys are all really committed to diversity and inclusion in this place. Also, reading African American authors. I'm a huge Langston Hughes fan. It doesn't get old. I will always go back to Langston Hughes and read that poetry. Maya Angelou is a classic, right? So this is a link to lots of African American authors and books. So if you are interested in reading a little bit more or engaging in a different way, and then listen to African American musicians. I've included music as far back as like ragtime music to as current as like neo soul. So it's a very mixed bag of music. And then I gave a little bit of a African American history timeline in case you wanted to get additional information of the history of Black History Month, how that evolved, and where we are today. So this will go out to all of you so that you'll have links if you want to do any additional research. And then I just want to say thank you guys so much for letting me come in and share my time with you. I do have a little bit of time left, so I wanted to open it up in case there were any questions, comments, and also I guess I have a question for the audience is, what are your experiences, right, with Black History Month? What made it important for you to come today? Because for each of you to be here, right, there was something in this title that elicited some interest. And so to understand kind of where you all are coming from and why it's important to you only feeds my passion for this work and encourages me to do this again. So thank you all so much for coming today. And then I want to open up the floor to you if there are any questions. Yes, ma'am.
Have you been able to take your son back to Eritrea?
So that's a fabulous question. My 8-year-old son has actually been back home more times than I have. He has a grandmother who every time she goes, she takes him. And I had probably the biggest joy of my life was this last summer. I got to go home for the very first time with my mom. Every other time I've gone by myself, and we have other family there, right? We have extended family, things like that. One time her brother from Germany flew and met me, but it was the very first time I got to go with my mom. And so to be able to go with my mom, to go to the village where where her mother was born, to see family members with her and have that connection was life-changing. Like I'm not sure I could ever have an experience better than that. And then to do it with my son, we took my son with us as well, was really for me monumental. She was planning to go with my son and I was like, I'm tagging along, I'm going too. And she was like, no, it's good, we'll all go. And we wanted my dad to go as well, but he's unfortunately pretty sick right now, and so he wasn't able to make the trip, but I think next year, fingers crossed, that we'll make the whole trip, because one thing that my mom was committed to was we went to my dad's village and we went to my mom's village. So everything that she did for her side of the family, she made sure that we also did, like for my dad's side of the family. I've gotten to meet her uncles. There's so many people that love my mom, and because they love her, right, they take really good care of me. And so it was really special to be back home with her and just experience kind of all of those things. My grandmother built a house in Eritrea, and what's kind of amazing about that is she bought land in the 50s and 60s when it was unheard of for women to be buying property. And then she built a house. And that house now is our family home in Eritrea. And so I have a deep commitment to making sure that that home is well taken care of. So every time we go home, we do something to improve the property. I'm the oldest of the cousins as well, and so I feel like I have to role model that to them. My mom has 3 other siblings, so the 4 of them are the owners of the home. And then I feel like the kids are kind of the gatekeepers, right? It's our responsibility so that we always have a place to go back to. That's a really special, I don't know that everybody can say that, right? There's a lot of African Americans here in the United States who struggle with finding identity. That's why there's this huge push, this back to Ghana experience. A lot of people are going back to Ghana and they're kind of creating roots there. And so I have a home, right? I have a place that I get to go back to. And I'm kind of the American one in the family, if you ask. And in 2018, when I went back home, I called my mom after 2 weeks. And I said, okay, so I'm moving here. It's over. I'm going to move here. And she was like, huh? And I was like, I found a school for my son. I'm going to open a business. And we have a house. So I think I should just move here. And she was like, I support that. She was like, great. And then I came here and I ended up meeting Dee at Seattle Children's, and I got this job, and it really changed the trajectory of my life. But yeah, I think one of the greatest gifts that I've ever been given is being able to go back home, and to go back home with my mom and my son. Thank you. Are there any other questions? Go right here and then I'll come there. Mom, oh, she has a...
I wondered about relationships between African Americans that have these firm relationships with the mother country and those who do not, who perhaps have been here for many generations and may not even know what that country is. And are there any problems that develop as a function of that?
So that's a really great question. I've experienced kind of that pretty heavily when I was at the University of Washington. When we wanted to start the African Student Association, the Black Student Union leaders were like, why? They were like, we have a Black student group. You guys just join us and we do this together. And we were like, you know, we have very specific needs and wants as an African immigrant community, and it's very different than those needs and wants of African Americans. And that's very hard for people to reconcile. And I think now we're at a place where we see more community, that there's, you know, I'm a big believer in there's not enough of us to kind of split up, right? We've got to create community in order to create success. But yes, there is tension in that space. And you've also got Africans who are emigrating from Africa have very limited exposure to African Americans. And that exposure is limited to what they see on TV, right? What they see on the internet. And a lot of that is stereotypical. Right? She said it's not much. And so what happens is when they immigrate to the United States, they have a very warped sense of who African Americans are, right? They think they don't have culture. They don't know who they are. They're, you know, lost in the wind. That's kind of what they consider them, as like the lost children. And so I think that's a lot of what this Back to Ghana movement is you don't have to know where you're from. You don't have to know what part of Africa you originally came from. But you can come back to Ghana and we're gonna welcome you with open arms. Because your ancestry is African, that's all that matters to us. And so we are seeing a much more, I would say, like to me, I'm imagining like arms around. I'm seeing a much bigger embrace of the African American community by the African community. And I don't think that was the case 10 or 15 years ago. I can remember growing up and hearing things like, they're all criminals, right? They all go to jail. Like, that's the culture. And so I've always believed that I can't hold someone else accountable to a standard that they didn't have, right? Culturally, for us, we have very different beliefs than America. And that's, you know, white Americans, African Americans, Asian Americans, everyone. It's very different. And I think once you accept those differences and just say, it's okay for it to be different, but at the core, we all want to be successful, right? Like, we all want to have a good quality of life. And so I think that's our foundation, and if we build on that, that's where we're seeing our wins. Thank you.
Yeah, hi. This is probably full of stereotypes, but I used to buy gasoline from a gas station that seemed to be run by an extended family of Eritreans. And they were doing a car washing event. Yep. And here came a standard African American, kind of wishing to join them and not getting very far. I think he saw some good-looking young ladies there, perhaps. But anyway, but you know, I see people from your country as kind of like our stereotype of Asians. They come, they're an extended family, the first generation runs a restaurant or something, second goes to college, the third, they're all PhD physicians, yep. Attorneys. I see this dynamic in people coming from Eritrea, perhaps Ethiopia, other such places, that I think has been punished out of the African American community. And I think they've lost that, and it's really tragic. And I really like your futures rather than history.
Thank you. We have been considered the model minority, right? We've heard that term used with Africans. We're hardworking, we're willing to do the jobs no one else is willing to do. You know, we're honest. Those are things that have been built into the culture. Right? We also don't have the same history as African Americans. We haven't been oppressed in the same way that they have, right? Even though back home in Eritrea we fought war, like my mom's generation, I have to believe all of them have PTSD from growing up in a war-torn country and losing family members right and left daily. There's not a family that hasn't been touched by the war. And even my older brother still has a bullet in his leg from the war. All of us have been touched. So we have a different experience than African Americans here in the United States. They have 400 years of oppression, slavery, of working for free, and having that work not be accounted for. And so it's no wonder that today's stereotypes are they don't want to work, right? They don't, because there's a history that has led to what we see today. I can respect that history and understand it. Doesn't mean I accept it, doesn't mean I think it's right, but I also understand where it comes from. My son's father was American. That was a very hard conversation in my family. I don't think my mother ever expected for me to marry an American. I don't think it was in her plans. I don't think she, you know, in her book of what my daughter's gonna do with her life, right, that I was gonna marry a blue-collar worker, right? He worked at UPS. His dad had worked at UPS for 30 years. He had been there for 10 or 15. He was a hard-working man, went to work every day and provided for his family, but I don't know that that's what she envisioned for me. And so, you know, she had to come to terms. There's part of that push-pull. And so she got to know him. And I remember the day my mom and my husband said, "I love you" to each other. Like, I cried, like I didn't know what to do, right? Because to me it was more than just the two of them kind of being okay with each other, but it was like the reality that we're all the same, right? We're from Eritrea, we're from America, whatever it is, like our experience is the same, and at the end of the day we want the same things. And so I think that's kind of been the way that I try to lead my work, is that what's our end goal? Like, we can talk about what happened and we could do it all day. But at the end of the day, if we don't know what our end goal is, what's our key to success, what's the point of all the things that we're doing, it doesn't give us a North Star. And so for me, my North Star is equitable access to success. And that's a broad term because I think it looks different for everyone. And so my job, and I think my commitment to what I'm doing in the world, is to create equitable access to success for people who look like me, for people who don't look like me, right? For the ability so that my son has the same ability to be successful tomorrow as every other kid in his class. And that my son doesn't have to come home and ask me, why did George Floyd get killed? Why are we protesting in the streets? You know, when my 7-year-old comes home and asks me, why do white people not like us? That's a heartbreaking conversation. I never thought I'd ever have to answer that question, right? I thought we were kind of past that place. So all it did is it allowed me to kind of recommit myself, to double down on my commitments, and then really think about ways that I can create that equitable access for folks kind of in everything that I do. Thank you. Feels like a good place to stop. Thank you guys so much.